All right. We've got to 100 participants right now, and we are 1 minute past the hour. So I would like to open up our webinar, and good morning and good afternoon and good evening, everyone, wherever you are in the world. It's a pleasure to host you at our webinar dedicated to the green shipping corridor topic. Let me introduce myself briefly. My name is Alexei Tatarenko. I'm a senior principal with RMI, leading our hydrogen initiatives, and I'll be your host for today. In terms of the agenda for today, it's pretty straightforward. We've got a panel of the great speakers, which is always nice to have. 5 of them, and we will roughly give 5 minutes to every speaker to present his or her perspectives on the green shipping corridors agenda. And after that, we are planning to do 15 minutes of Q&A session. So please feel free to post your questions in a Q&A box. And we will try to take 3 to 5 questions at the end of this session to address by the panelists. This webinar is being recorded. We plan to distribute the link to the recording after the webinar alongside with the link to the pre-feasibility handbook that we will be talking about today. The handbook has been developed by the RMI in close collaboration with Mærsk Mc-Kinney Møller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping under the umbrella of the Green Hydrogen Catapult. Alex Hewitt, who is the chairman of the Catapult and CEO of CWP Global, is here with us. And it's worthwhile to say that the Green Hydrogen Catapult is the joint initiative between high-level champions, United Nations high-level champions, and a number of front runners in the green hydrogen corporate world, but also there is a number of companies that are off-takers in their respective sectors. And one of the sectors that the Catapult is focusing on is the shipping sector, where we as RMI work very closely with Mærsk Mc-Kinney Møller Center on the topic of handbook and other topics as well. So why is this topic so important? Well, as you know, the shipping industry is regulated by IMO, International Maritime Organization, and the current target for decarbonization that has been set bring us to net zero emission world for shipping by roughly 2100, which is not good enough, right? Therefore, the industry comes together, and one of the and front runners in the industry are coming together and try to adopt more ambitious targets while waiting for more progressive regulations from IMO. One of such initiatives has been announced at COP27 actually, and has been orchestrated by the Green Hydrogen Catapult and United Nations high-level champions and GMF, and has brought together essentially the shipping industry and green hydrogen industry to set up the ambition at the level which puts us on the right trajectory to reach net zero in shipping by 2050. And that ambition has been set as at the level of having 5% of zero emission fuels by 2030, and the green hydrogen companies essentially has undertaken the pledge to supply 5.5 million tons of zero emission fuels by 2030, and the shipping industry respectively has taken a pledge upon itself to put the zero emission vessels on water by that timeline. What does that ambition mean? That means if you would translate this into the green shipping corridors numbers, that would mean that we will need to have from 20 to 30 green shipping corridors in operation by 2030. Well, green shipping corridors is an amazing concept, but it's relatively new concept, and we know that this is a huge coordination challenge to create those coalitions that will be pursuing and realizing those green shipping corridors. I'm sure the panelists will talk about that in details. And that means that we need to start planning those green shipping corridors now without any delay. And that's where the handbook that we will be talking about is coming into play. It's meant to help multiple actors in this space to come together, whether we talk about ports or freight forwarders or shipping lines or cargo owners. The handbook allows them to come together to form the coalition, and using the handbook to define the optimal routes and the optimal corridors that they can pursue. So with that short framing, I would like to kick off the panel. As I mentioned in the beginning of our conversation, we've got a great set of players on this panel. We've got a fuel producer or hydrogen developer representative, Alex Hewitt here. We've got the Port of Rotterdam here with us. We've got the shipping line. We've got C40, the organization that already coordinates a couple of corridors here with us. And I believe we will have a very fruitful discussion today. Our first speaker is Johan Bischkopf-Svensson, who is with Mærsk Mc-Kinney Møller Center. Johan is leading Johan is a program manager, and he's leading essentially the green shipping corridors agenda with Mærsk Mc-Kinney Møller Center, focusing on Chile, Rotterdam, Singapore, and Northern Europe Baltic corridors. Johan, the floor is yours. I think the question that I'll put to yourself is, could you tell us about the state of play in the green shipping corridor world? Are we moving fast enough? Where are we on this journey? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alexei. So back to what you said. So yeah, we developed this handbook, but let us just set the scene for that. That we saw the Climate Bank Declaration a couple of years ago. We saw a strong focus on people announcing the green corridor projects, but we also saw at least some of those corridor projects struggling a bit in actually finding out exactly what to do and how to move forward. And with the very ambitious target of getting a substantial amount of alternative fuel deployed already by 2030, seen from our side and in the industry, it's paramount that we get a number of projects up and running and get them further from just being thoughts, but actually getting them into true projects with action. So what we in the center, as you said, we developed together with yourself, Alexei, and the Rocky Mountain Institute. We developed the pre-feasibility blueprint. Together with McKinsey, we developed the feasibility blueprint. And this is really to ignite the project maturation. What we saw over the initial part of 2022 was probably that a number of those projects or consortia who wanted to get started with it struggled a bit on actually how to get started with this. So where we are in the overall setting of the industry and the state of the art is probably that a lot of companies, countries, institutions are really engaged in the decarbonization of shipping, see the value in green corridors, but also struggling to find out how to actually get it all moving. Because the whole idea of the green corridors and this initial thought about getting these alternative fuels into play is a bit like the first, why would you buy the first electrical car, which if you at the same time had to develop a wind farm? Or why would you buy a petrol-driven car if you at the same time had to buy an oil field? So this is a bit where we are right now with these alternative fuels, as they are not a standard commodity. So that whole new way of thinking where we need to bring the entire value chain together, that's probably setting the scene of where we are right now. It's really bringing into one group both the fuel producers, as you said, the ports, the shipping line, the cargo owners, and getting and as well the stakeholders and regulators in the area of interest to get an idea of what is actually needed to unlock this and to get the alternative fuels being deployed and used on the alternative vessels. Because we all agree that by 2050 we need there. At 2050, hopefully we're not talking about green corridors. We're probably hopefully seeing a map where all the shipping lines are green. So it's really that unlocking that for the next, what should I say, 10, 20 years. This is really what is important right now, 10, 15 years, to get these projects up and running, demonstrate that actually the fuel can be deployed and used in engines, can be bunkered in the respective ports, and demonstrating both to the remaining part of the commercial industry that it's actually doable, but also to the regulators that it can be done, so that a reasonable and high CO2 taxation can be implemented on the fossil-based fuel. It's difficult for the regulators right now to impose that CO2 taxation if there is not really an alternative. So that's what these green corridors, the first movers here, they have to demonstrate, is that this is possible, so that the regulation can be enforced and we can get that transition which is needed. Because as you said, 5 million tons by 2030 is much more than what we have right now, but it's far from enough to have 5% in 2030, and when we need to get to 100% by 2050. So those first 5% are difficult, but they are, I mean, they should pave the road, but we have to understand that the remaining 20 years, they have to then be 95% more. So so I would say state of art where we are, well, we're in a position where we have a lot of good projects, ideas out there. Some are being matured into be fairly concrete, but we need the fuel, and Noah actually talk a bit more about the fuel, but we need that to be in place before final investment decision can be taken. So we're in this preparation phase where a lot of things are being done. Several shipping lines, ports are testing individual elements, but bringing it all together and get the FID for a full-blown green corridor is still to be seen, and hopefully something that we will see by next year. So that's kind of setting the scene of where we are right now.
Thank you, Johan. That's very, very helpful. Next, I would like to go to Alex Hewitt, CEO of CWP Global and the chairman of the Green Hydrogen Catapult. Alex is a founding partner and the chairman the founding partner of CWP and the chairman of the Green Hydrogen Catapult, as I've already mentioned. Alex has decades of experience in developing renewables business and built gigawatts of wind energy projects both in Europe and Asia, starting since 2005. And he is now focused, and CWP Global is focused on the development of 170 gigawatt portfolio of green hydrogen projects across the globe. So the logical question there for you, Alex, is that we've heard quite often in the process of preparation of the statement of COP27, in particular, from the shipping industry, that hydrogen-based fuel supply chain might be a bottleneck while we will be decarbonizing the shipping industry. It will be very interesting, therefore, to hear your perspective as a big green hydrogen developer and fuel producer on this subject.
Yeah, thank you, Alexei. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a great initiative. Yeah, we've done a fair few megawatts or gigawatts of wind and renewables in the past, but this is another scale altogether. So this is challenging for the world to start to rise to these levels of supply, which are going to be needed. I mean, on the encouraging side, let's just come back to the joint statement on green hydrogen shipping, 5.5 million tons per annum. Yeah, is that realistic? Is it achievable? Certainly it is. It is. And as Johan said, it's a step forward. Yeah, we're going to need 15-20 times that by 2050. These numbers are enormous. So 5.5 million tons per annum of hydrogen is probably looking at about $120–150 billion worth of investment. Can it be done? Absolutely. And thank you for your introduction, Alexei. You know, CWP Global's got a very ambitious and very large portfolio of over 170 gigawatts at this stage. And more importantly, perhaps, is the momentum in the announcement of many other projects for green hydrogen across the globe. These are rising exponentially in announcements, but they're rising from a very low base. So we've got to keep that in mind. And also, of course, is the big challenge is making a paper project into a real project. And that is going to be a very significant challenge. Can it be done? Again, I say, yes, it can. But you know, let's perhaps just reflect also on some lead times. There are going to be a number of smaller projects, particularly closer to where the current load is or the demand will be. They will typically take around 3 years for a lead time into a project. Our projects, which we're developing and others like us, have much larger scale, perhaps much more ambitious, and will fill a very significant portion of the demand for these green fuels in the future. Those will take more like 8 years of lead time. So things are going to only start to get truly real by the end of this decade. The smaller projects are extremely important, particularly in the early phases. But as we move forward, the challenge will be bringing much larger volumes of green ammonia, green methanol, the fuels for the ships in the 2030s and beyond. And look, I haven't got the perfect crystal ball, but we'll see a shift down to those supply centers as we move into the 2030s, because where you only get these volumes of supply where you get where you get the large areas and the best renewable energy, because that's the core ingredient going into electrolyzers and green hydrogen. And where that is competing with grid-based demand, it's always going to be challenging to get large volumes. So that's why I say the global south will start supplying all of the centers around the world as we move into the 2030s. So in a nutshell, it's exciting times, but making paper announced projects into real projects is going to be challenging.
All right. Well, yes, we can. I hear loud and clear from Alex. That's great. I think it's also important for the industry to understand where to supply those fuels, and that's again where green shipping corridors as a concept are extremely helpful, because they answer exactly that question, right? And with that, I would like to transfer to our next speaker, to Martin Kopke, who is representing Hapag-Lloyd, one of the biggest shipping lines in the world. Will be great to get your perspective, Martin, in a minute. It's worthwhile saying that Martin is working for 50% of his time with Mærsk Mc-Kinney Møller Center, where he is seconded, but for the other 50% of his time, he's leading Hapag-Lloyd's decarbonization team in Hamburg. And Martin's work is mainly focused on R&D projects and decarbonization of the shipping industry, of course. And Martin, I think the key question for you is, about Hapag-Lloyd and your ambitions. You've got quite a significant fleet of vessels. I believe it's more than 250. What are your ambitions? What are the main opportunities that you see here? What are the main challenges, perhaps? The floor is yours.
Thanks, Alexei, and also thanks to Jon and Alex for the words. Basically, what Hapag-Lloyd wants to do, we have a target by 2045 that we want to be carbon neutral, and to 2030 we want to reduce our emissions by about 30%. And I think we see that today in this panel. We need much more than only the shipping community. We need the ports, we need energy providers, bunker providers. It's much more complex. So what we starting with right now we make our fleet more efficient. We have an extensive program on efficiency measures, but we know that will be not enough to fully decarbonize. So the next step is then new fuels. And for that, we need to find the infrastructure on one side, but on the other hand side, of course, the right ships where we can do it. And we currently look very careful at our fleet, where we may have retrofits if it should be new buildings. And for such assets which sail for 25 years, this is of course very considerated thoughts we have to do, and where and in which areas can we deploy those ships. So currently we're looking basically at all our options, what we can do and where. We are in discussions with energy providers, what they are able to produce, and we look, of course, into our fleet, what quantities on new fuels will we need for that. And then what we also see, some of the energy providers are new to the maritime world. So then we have the question how we will get the new fuels to the ships. So there is infrastructure necessary. Where can we store fuels in the ports? There is sometimes regulations necessary. And we see those green corridor projects as very, very good demonstrators to overcome these first challenges. And I'm very convinced at some point we will have a world where we will see low carbon fuels everywhere, as diesel was introduced some 50 or 70 years ago, or was a steam engine some 200 years ago. So that's just the next step.
Thank you, Martin, for your perspectives. Next, I think we will go to the port of Rotterdam. It's super important to understand ports' perspectives, as ports are in the midst of, and big enablers of everything that relates to the green shipping corridors. And we are lucky to have Rafke with us, who is responsible for business development and management of the energy transition department in the port of Rotterdam, focusing on sustainable supply chains. And essentially Rafke's team work is to accelerate or aimed at acceleration of sustainable opportunities to reduce transport emissions, be that in import transport or maritime vessels. I think the key question, Rafke, not surprising for you, as ports are in the middle of the whole story and play a very important orchestrator role, I believe, when it comes to enabling the green shipping corridors, is how do you think about green shipping corridors, and how do you see the role of ports in this play? Over to you.
Well, thank you. Well, I think it's a very interesting opportunity, of course, also because we launched some green corridors ourselves. One of them, the largest corridor between Rotterdam and Singapore, but also with Gothenburg. And I think it's a good way to see that how we can scope a corridor, and that we have the opportunity to see what is needed in order to decarbonize a certain route, and then also facilitate change on a specific route together with the entire value chain. Because in this way we can learn and also hopefully duplicate our lessons. So what Johan also said, that in the end we don't only have corridors, we have an entire network of corridors, and Yeah, it's a good way that the whole value chain is also part of a green corridor, because in the end, every link in the chain needs to change in order to change the whole. And as a port, we are also a link within this whole value chain. And we have our responsibilities. And as a port authority, we do not own bunker ships. We don't have storage facilities. We are not a fuel supplier, but we are a landlord, and we need to make sure that the right safety standards are in place. So we will assess operational readiness related to issues as safe handling of new fuels. So we want to make sure that we won't be the bottleneck in this transition to more sustainable fuels. And we see the green corridors, for example, as an important opportunity to exchange also the knowledge about the port readiness, and also to help other ports along the route, not only bunker ports, but also ports of call. By exchanging the knowledge, we built as the largest biofuel hub, and also the first ship-to-ship methanol bunkering port. So yeah, I think the green corridor is an important example on how we can support and also work together within the value chain, and set up like the overarching coalitions in order to change every link within this value chain to change the whole. Because with only developing safety standards and making sure the port is ready, we will still not make a change. So I think that's about it for now. And then probably there are going to be more questions. So
yes, the questions are coming through. Thanks, Rafka, for your perspectives. And last but not least, I would like to go to Alisa Kreins from C40 CGIS, a good friend and partner on the projects. Alisa leads C40's ports and shipping program and is responsible for development and delivery of C40's global strategy aimed at reducing the emissions from ports and from maritime shipping. Most importantly, Alisa's program is focused on the implementation of the first green shipping corridors. These are Trans-Pacific green shipping corridors connecting Port of LA and Port of Long Beach and Shanghai. That corridor has been announced a while ago, and most recently the second corridor that has been announced is between Los Angeles, or should be between Los Angeles, Long Beach, and Singapore, and that's going to be a green and digital shipping corridor. I guess the key question for you, Alisa, as you are involved already in a couple of these coalitions that are formed to realize the green shipping corridors, is, you know, what opportunities do you see? What goes like well and smoothly when you put this reasonably novel concept into work, and you know, what are the challenges also that you might be facing while realizing it?
Thank you, Alexei. Excellent questions. Can I just start by highlighting how encouraging it is to see a growing number of green corridors practitioners in the global maritime sector? In just 2 years, we went from having 0 green corridors to over 20 different initiatives emerge around the world. So I think that's really encouraging and exciting. The role of C40 in green corridor space is to convene shipping coalitions and help them move from ambition and ideation to implementation. So as Alex from CWP noted earlier, moving projects from paper to action is what we need to do today. And that's what we have been focused on. As Alexei just introduced our 2 projects, we have 2 active green shipping corridor projects in various stages of planning and implementation. One is the Los Angeles-Shanghai corridor, which is one of the busiest container routes in the world, responsible for moving over 40% of all goods arriving into the United States. The LA-Shanghai corridor partnership is preparing to release a corridor implementation plan. Once the plan is out, we'll be moving towards implementation. The second corridor is Los Angeles-Long Beach-Singapore corridor, which was announced during COP27. So it's a pretty new initiative. We're currently in the scoping phase of development. So in a way, we act as a green shipping corridors incubator and work with many different value chain actors, from governments to ports to shipping lines, cargo owners and fuel producers, to bring these corridors together and take them from ambition to action. So to answer your question, Alexi, which I think is a really great question, where in practice, where do we find green corridor coalitions are able to collaborate and cooperate successfully? I think that what we've found so far is that the coalitions are being very good at working across many political, cultural, public, private sector boundaries, which is just as important as alignment of goals, as alignment on goals and ambition of the corridor. You can have many willing stakeholders from different parts of the value chain, but if they can't work together, there is no way to have a green corridor. So we think that's been working really well. And I think the example of the LA-Shanghai corridor, which is a major US-China partnership, is a really good example of that. So building on that point, I would also add that I think green corridor coalitions have been successful at demonstrating unified efforts across different groups of stakeholders, which is also a very positive sign. For example, we see BCOs making a unified effort through platforms like COSAV. This helps create market power to encourage carriers to deploy clean ships and fuel producers to produce clean fuels. We see ports starting to work together to form a unified voice on green corridors so that they can advocate for green shipping policy and develop common standards and shared incentives together. Port cities are working to collaborate not just with other governments, but with industry at the local, regional, national, and global levels. So we see those are as very, very positive signs, and also I'd say success stories that we can now say do present themselves in the green corridor coalitions that are moving from ideation to action today. As for troublesome points, I would say that developing commitments to meet near-term goals is definitely a challenge. Corridor partners may be well aligned on their ambition for the corridor overall, but have different pathways to reaching the goal. And that makes near-term action planning challenging. This is something we're working to figure out on the LA-Shanghai corridor, where we aim to define our goals for 2025 and 2030. Another challenge I can think of is, and I think that's pretty common across other green corridor initiatives out there, data sharing. It's definitely a challenge. How do you share data and establish a digital process for the corridor partnership in a way that is transparent, secure, and helps deploy digital solutions that do improve efficiencies and accelerate decarbonization. So this is something the LA Long Beach Singapore corridor, which is a green and digital corridor, is working on. And so we are actively figuring out how to develop digital solutions that can support the goals of the corridor. So I'd say those are the two main challenges I would highlight, but challenges aside, there is a lot of enthusiasm around green shipping corridors. And at C40, we are really excited to be able to support this arena for collaboration and work collectively to incubate green shipping corridor projects around the world.
Fantastic. Thank you, Elisa, for your very deep and practical insights, but also overall optimistic tone. And it seems like it's a vibrant space to be involved in the practical realization of the green shipping corridors. I think with that, we probably should move to the questions. We are well on time, which is great. All the panelists have done excellent work in staying within the time boundaries. So I think we can take 3 to 5 questions now. So the first question, Martin, will be probably for you, and it's about retrofitting of the vessels. Is this economic as a concept, or you need to build brand new vessels?
Well, I assume that depends a lot on the technology, on the fuel we talk about, and yet we haven't done it. And we are in discussions with classes, with engine manufacturers. So far, what we can see, it is quite comprehensive. And some years ago, we were the first one who retrofitted conventional vessel to LNG, and I can tell that was very comprehensive. And let's put it in friendly words, we learned a lot when doing this. So we certainly look into it. It is, of course, always easier to fix things in a shipyard when you do the design rather than changing it in the aftermath. But for the challenges which we face ahead, we wouldn't disregard any options, at least not at this stage.
Thank you, Martin. And the next question will be for Johan, and it's about the clean fuels of the future. And Alex, you will be also welcome to chime in with your perspectives on this. But maybe I'll give the floor to Johan first. If you could comment on that, and Johan, to make it more fun, there is like a very specific question about the cruise lines from Bill Lighty. And Bill is involved into Pacific Northwest hub here in the US, and there is a great opportunity there to decarbonize some of this cruise shipping lines going to Alaska and etc. And therefore, Bill is asking what's our view here on the panel on what would be the potential winning fuel for cruise lines specifically. Is it liquid hydrogen or is it methanol? Bill didn't mention ammonia. I guess maybe he ruled it out already, but the floor is yours. Please comment.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I think there are a couple of time perspectives that we have to remember in this. So, I mean, when we look at these two fuels mentioned here, methanol and ammonia, there are at least some key aspects to remember. That is, the methanol engine is there. The ammonia engine is being developed, but it's not there. So if someone is decarbonizing and had a very, very short time frame and really wants to be best in the world in this, then they cannot wait for the ammonia engine to turn around all of their vessels. Hence, they will have to choose methanol rather than ammonia. Not saying that they'll not choose ammonia later, but needs to get started with methanol because at least it's there. So that's on a very short term. On a middle term, I would say cruise ships are quite interesting in the respect that we know, all of us, of course, that ammonia is toxic. We need to have the safety measures in place for that. And at least from the center point of view, we don't see that passenger ships or cruise and road packs would be utilizing ammonia within let's say, a foreseeable future, 10, 15 years. So on that time scale, I think that a safe bet back here would be that methanol will be used on ferry lines, road packs, it will be used on cruise ships, it will be used on a number of ships with a large amount of people on board. And we would see that dry bulk carriers, product tankers and container vessels are those testing the ammonia and utilizing the ammonia. And probably for the first, 10, 12, 14, 15 years of ammonia being ready and the engines being ready. And then on the very long time horizon, what would be the winning fuel? I mean, if you can allow me to say that that's well beyond my lifetime, or maybe at the end of that, so let's say by the end of the century or something like this, then in that time, I'm quite sure that ammonia will be, fully qualified for a number of places. So in that respect, yes, if we're talking 50 years out into the future, something like that, ammonia, seen from a pure production cost point of view, is likely to be the winning fuel. But there will be some niche areas where methanol might be used all the way through. And methanol definitely will have other production or other ways of being used, especially within the aviation and further refining it. So back to your question, what should be done in the Pacific Northwest for the cruise ships between Vancouver and Tacoma and Alaska? I see that as being a methanol for at least 15 years, 20 years. Our center is involved in a project with the Tacoma, Seattle area, looking towards also South Korea, but also looking what could be done in that area. So that would be my view on cruise ships. and passenger ships in general.
Right. Thank you, Johan. Very clear. I'm looking at Alex. Alex, would you have anything to add to this? And maybe also an additional question for you is about your perspective on national security concerns when designing the green corridors as the Ukraine war and standoff between the US, Europe, and China intensify. I should add as Ukrainian-Russian war on Ukraine, not Ukraine's war.
I think you should have a crack at that question, actually, Alexei. But just adding to, I agree with everything Johan said in a nutshell. And I think if you look at the two fuel sources, ammonia, there's challenges with safety. There's a lot of work being done by MMM as well as others on the safety angle. And let's say we hope that we can find technical solutions. I'm sure they'll come. Whether it's ever, in the not too distant. Let me leave it at that. But I think the challenge, of course, with methanol more broadly is the supply of biogenic carbon, and that will sort of tend to limit shipping in the overall sense. So we still see ammonia coming in, but I hope if they're running cruise ships, they're all fully decarbonized in the next few years on methanol. That'd be great to see.
And on security topic, Alex, would you like to have a crack on it, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big, broad subject, isn't it?
It is.
Where do you start? Do you want to be more precise on the security question?
Well, I think the way I read this question is how this transition helps to reduce the risks, or vice versa, right? When it comes to global shipping, and from my perspective, it helps to reduce the risks, because if you would look at the number of countries that can be potential suppliers of this, hydrogen-based fuels in particular, this is a much wider range of countries who can be involved into this opportunity, and therefore, in my view, that diversifies the risks of fuel supply significantly. I think the very interesting, of course, question here, and something that we have to be very mindful about, and that we discuss a lot in the Green Hydrogen Catapult these days, is how to ensure the level playing field and provide the opportunity, particularly for the countries in the global south, to be properly involved and fully realize these opportunities, because we see that OECD world countries are introducing very generous subsidy packages to support clean hydrogen and therefore clean fuels production, while there is a risk, therefore, that developing countries will have to compete on a pure economic fundamentals. And I think this is a risk that I think we have to be mindful about, because I think this energy transition, including the transition in shipping, should be equitable and just, right? So that's a perspective that I would provide here.
Well answered, Alexei. I couldn't agree more. I mean, when you sort of step back, though, and you look at the security supply problems at the moment in the broad scheme of things, they're fairly small compared to the challenge ahead in the decarbonisation of the world's energy supply. So yes, it's a bit of a wake-up call, and there's certainly a lot happening. But the challenge ahead is magnitudes larger. What effect will it have? Yes, we'll have more decentralization, as we've seen in the power sector as well, and more opportunity for countries which are resource rich in terms of renewable energy, and particularly for the Africa story, that is incredibly exciting.
Cannot agree more. The next question will be for Rafka, and it will be very specific. Rafka, what would it take for the port like Rotterdam to be able to bunker ammonia?
We need to make sure that the protocols are in place, and we need to quantify the risks and also mitigate well, we have to put mitigating measures in place. And at the moment we are working on this. We do this with the entire value chain, so with the complete market in a very large consortia. And we are expecting the first trial in 2024. So it's not that, yeah, we are working on it. So it's mostly on the protocol side and the safety mitigating measures. But upcoming year, we expect the first trial.
Well, great to hear this. 2024 is just around the corner, isn't it?
Yeah.
So thanks, Refke. It's very encouraging to hear this. And of course, you know, Rotterdam is a densely populated area. So if it can be done in Rotterdam and, you know, your trial is successful, I think it can be done anywhere else in the world, I believe. Maybe with that, I would I'll go to the next question, and it will be for Elisa. So the question is essentially about the benefits of the green shipping corridors. All right, Elisa, you've mentioned some challenges in establishing those green shipping corridors. What are the main benefits? Is it lower cost fuel? Is it like improved safety? What would be your top 3, top 5?
Top 3, top 5. Well, I think we've talked about this quite a bit today. I think it's definitely, you know, lowering the cost of fuels and the uptake of new technologies. But I think, you know, every speaker today mentioned how important green shipping corridors are to decarbonizing global maritime industry, as well as, frankly, in sort of a broader energy transition space. Green corridors allow to turn public-private partnerships into action. And I think for us, this has been very much of a hands-on experience where we are bringing together public and private sector stakeholders and getting them to work together, agree on joint goals and commitments, and move from idea to implementation. So I think that's definitely where green corridors are playing a key role. I think, you know, the benefits are certainly related to you know, to deployment of new technologies and transition to green fuels. But I think overall, green corridors have this really important ripple effect throughout the whole global supply chains, where they can actually help catalyze decarbonization of other sectors, not just maritime. Because if you think about what a green corridor is, it doesn't just stop at the berth of a terminal. In fact, in one of our corridor projects, we are looking at a gate-to-gate scope of the project, where we are including port operations. So things that do operate on land, things that do operate within the port harbor, are also important sources of emissions, and we are working to eliminate those and address those. But then you are looking at, you know, what happens past the gate of the terminal, what happens when, you know, when the cargo moves to the warehouse, when it reaches its final destination, and that all should be a part of green corridor. So I think maybe my sort of more visionary answer to the question would be, I think green corridors can act as catalysts, not just in a maritime space, but go beyond it and really have the impact on broader global supply chains.
Thank you, Elisa. So I think we took 5 questions, and I think they were well distributed. I think there is one for me, which is about the green shipping corridor pre-feasibility handbook, when it will be available. Actually, it is available. It is on the website of the Green Hydrogen Catapult, and you will receive the link after the webinar. I believe Mærsk Mc-Kinney Møller Center also has the handbook on their website, but we'll definitely distribute the link after this webinar. So we have a little bit more time left, and I would like to maybe move to the closing remarks by the panelists, and then we will be able to finish well on time. And I think the question that I would put for closing remark is, you know, what do you like, to make it very specific and very tangible, and, you know, bring the timeline even, you know, more forward and not to look into 2030, but this year, what would you like to see happening in the green shipping corridor space? But you are of course welcome to comment on 2030 timeline as well. So maybe starting with Johan. Johan, what is your wish for this year?
My wish for this year is that we understand that it's a combined value chain. It's both the fuel production, it's the ports, it's the shipping line, and it's the cargo owners. And we need to understand that we need to move the fuel projects from laboratory scale or scale the size of a garage and into substantial size, so we can actually get some corridors moving. I mean, we need some plants producing, I don't know, 100, 200,000 tons of e-methanol and e-ammonia respectively to get this moving, to demonstrate that it's actually working rather than demonstrating it on paper. So, I mean, one wish for this year would be that the Inflation Reduction Act or EU or similar would understand the need for actually supporting these, which in the long term will be small scale compared to what Alex said before. We're probably going to end up with million-ton scale plants, but we need some of these 100, 200,000 tons plants to be developed and to be, I mean, sanctioned, FIDs as soon as possible to actually demonstrate that this could be working. So if there would be one wish, then it would be that we get the understanding that this is really the bottleneck to get a substantial amount of fuel available. So I'll cross fingers for that.
Thank you, Johan. I'm sure Alex would have probably a similar wish, but I don't want to guess. Alex, what is your wish for this year?
Well, look, proof of concept is always is paramount. I really like the handbook. I think it's great. I'd like to see that, people embrace, companies embrace that and get it moving. I think it's a really good path. I mean, we need a path to data, to policy, so that people can lobby, can push to policymakers to also really get behind what needs to be done, because we're entering into a world of great uncertainty. We haven't talked about cost very much, but when you combine, long lead times with an uncertain market, massive costs and investment needed on the fuel supply side, the port supply side, the shipping supply side, what is the cost of all this? It's very difficult to have the perfect crystal ball on the trajectory of costs, when those costs are very much largely linked with scale, technology development, of course, once again, scale. All of this comes back to a very large level of uncertainty. So those that are building a ship, or those that are building a massive big green ammonia hub or a port, have to make a leap of faith at the moment. And to address uncertainty, that's where policy is needed. In order to enact policy, you need data and you need a really strong argument. And I think that handbook really captures the path towards that very well.
Yeah, cannot agree more, Alex, and thanks for highlighting that. Right, the handbook has been designed, to be accessible and to be very practical in its nature, right, and hopefully easy to implement for anyone who wants to initiate the green shipping corridor in any part of the world.
And collaboration is the key. Has been mentioned a few times.
Indeed. So with that, and of course, fuel cost reduction is very essential, right? The quicker we drive the costs down, the more corridors we'll see, the faster will be the transition in the shipping sector. But we already see, of course, big regions moving on this. Martin, what's your wish for this year or for this decade?
Yeah, so for this year, I wish to see more of those projects for feasibility and pre-feasibility studies, because further, I wish to see the first consortia building for those green corridors, because when we start ordering a vessel today, it will take 3.5–4 years until we see it in the water. At the same time, to start to produce alternative fuels. It will probably take a similar amount of time. And Alex mentioned the risk and the costs, or the risk for cost. When we launch a vessel today, we want to sail it for 25 years. And when we have a very specialized fuel, I'm not sure if we can guarantee to see the vessel for 25 years in the same service. So we would love to see much more green corridor projects to reduce the risk, where we can deploy the vessel, and we need to sail those vessels internationally, basically around the world. And there, my wish is, of course, to see develop this contribution of fuels much more, and to see more green corridor projects.
Very clear, Martin. Thank you. And then over to Rafka.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I think it's quite obvious that we have to prepare for a multi-fuel future. And all these different fuels, they have different maturity timelines, challenges and opportunities. I think we cannot wait for the golden egg to be there. We will have a basket of golden eggs in the meantime. And I think it is time now, because we know in the end what the fuels need to be the upcoming years. So we now need tangible demonstrators in order to see what are the gaps, what doesn't fit, what is indeed the mismatch between demand and supply, why is there a mismatch, how can regulation help with this. So we really start to make sense of what can the demonstrators be on specific corridors, so we can really work from there. So it's kind of thinking big and starting small. Well, starting small with a ship between Rotterdam and Singapore is not that small, but you get what I mean. So I think the modeling and the analyzing is very good to give an idea on what is needed in the long run. But I think it's also now time to really see if we can start with the demonstrators. And then hopefully then by learning from those demonstrators and by closing the gaps that come out of these demonstrators, we can enable a kind of a tipping point in it, like in hopefully, I don't know, a few years.
Your
and then
2024 trial will be successful.
Yeah.
I trust it will be.
Yeah.
So
And then
very
in the
clear,
end,
we need to get going and, you know, make this demonstration happen and be successful. That's very clear. Alisa, over to you.
So actually somebody posted a question in the chat and I maybe got answered already, but the question was about how do we make sure that a lot of these green shipping corridor initiatives don't get stuck in a pilot phase. And I think it's a really good question. I think what we need to do this year and for the following years is we need to make sure that all of us green shipping corridor projects and practitioners are getting really good at communicating with each other, because we need to, regardless of the portfolio of fuels and solutions that, you know, that is on the table and that we're all working on, the basket of golden eggs, as Refke called it, I think we all need to make sure that we're speaking the same language, that we're aligned on the strategy, that it's not just about the 2050 goal, but that we are all being very good at sharing knowledge with one another. So, so I think for this year, this would be on my wish list of practical things that need to happen. Perhaps a very pedestrian wish, but I think that's something we're going to do.
This is excellent, Alisa, and I cannot agree more. I mean, my wish is for us to work together. I thoroughly enjoy the discussion and at this panel, right? I think this is a great example of how we can combine our knowledge and hopefully, you know, that knowledge and the projects that we are working on, you know, will accumulate into the major breakthroughs when it comes to the green shipping corridors. And of course, the handbook that launched should be a tool that should help everyone to enable and make those green shipping corridors happen. But collaboration and knowledge sharing are very, very, very crucial on this journey. So with that, I would like to wrap up our panel and our discussion. I would like to thank all the panelists for doing a great job, staying within time, and sharing very, very deep insights. And I think this is our first conversation this year, but I believe it shouldn't be the last. We should continue having this conversation and exchange our experiences while moving forward on this exciting green shipping corridors journey. Thank you very much for joining us today, and to be continued.
Thank you.
Let's see.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.